Welcome to the C Word, the Conservators podcast. Today we're talking about the museum pie. I'm Jenna Mathiasson, an objects conservator based in South Yorkshire.
I'm Chloe Rumsey, an objects conservator based in Greater Manchester.
And I'm Christina, an objects conservator based in Cambridgeshire.
So, ladies, do we have any news this week?
I have some news that's not strictly conservation related, but it's a story that made me laugh so much this week.
Oh, please go on.
And it is kind of computer related, so I figured it would be good for this episode. You may have seen it. It's about a researcher, an artificial intelligence researcher called Janelle Shane, who works on neural networks. So basically, teaching computers to learn things naturally in the same way that people learn things, so that they, as they get more and more knowledge about a particular thing, then they're able to kind of build on that and so on. And she, in the past, has taught computers to do all kinds of things, including like making up new recipes based on what's in existing recipe books. But what she's turned her attention to this time is inventing new paint colours and even better names for those paint colours.
Oh, God.
So basically, she says, for this experiment, I gave the neural network a list of about 7,700 Sherwin-Williams paint colours, along with their RGB values. Could the neural network learn to invent new paint colours and give them attractive names? Basically, from what it's learnt about how these existing 8,000 paint colours are named. And she had, I think it's fair to say, kind of mixed results. So the first ones were all basically kind of sludgy, grey-y kind of colours, and the computer was trying to call them things like K-Blay and Say-Blay and so on, which she thinks is because it was kind of attempting a combination of the colours blue, brown and grey. So she kind of cranked up the creativity setting on it, and it started coming out.
Oh, please tell me that's a giant dial.
Yeah, I would love it to be. She started coming up with colours like Bilfgome Glozd and so on, and Dondarf.
What kind of colours are they?
And kind of, so Dondarf is a kind of fetching lilac-y colour, and Bilfgome Glozd is a pale, acidy, yellowy lime colour. But then she carried on, and it started coming up with things that it started learning what was a grey, what was a blue, and so on. But the names are absolutely had me in hysterics, I'm afraid. So it calls things, it's calling colours like Snowbonk and Catbabel.
Oh, I would pick my war with that.
And Burble Simp, Stanky Bean. Stoner Blue, Turdley, Dope. I don't know where he's getting this stuff from. Dorkwood, Stummy Beige, and so on. So anyway, go and look at her blog and have a look at the colours and so on. It just kind of reminded me of the struggle we have as conservators sometimes to put kind of names to colours and kind of match colours and come up with stuff like that.
I think we should get it to start naming exhibitions.
Oh, that would be amazing.
I bet there's someone out there who's going to make one of those generator things on the internet for that. That would be amazing.
Could someone please do that? Thanks.
Just an exhibition name generator. Someone out there code that right now. It's an order. That would be amazing. Oh, it would be great if you could choose if it's an arty one or an archaeology one, and then it'll choose from different word clouds. Yeah. There's more likely to be something about bones if it's archaeology based. Anyway, I'm way off topic.
Anyway, if you're a conservator and you're looking for the perfect name for that really difficult to name shade of purpley, grey, blue, go out there and this neural network will have a name for it. The name might be Stoner Blue or Dorkwood or Runching Blue or Bank Butt, but hey.
Oh, it sounds amazing. Oh, I love it.
Awesome.
Anyway, great piece of news. I love that. That's highly entertaining. We're definitely going to link to that. And then just a kind of general reminder, we are on Patreon. Please check us out. There's a link in the description. We do amazing stuff on Patreon, so come on, join us. All right. Today we are talking about what I'll call museum pie, by which I mean raspberry pies in museums.
But not the food.
No,
like people keep telling me this. It's not the food.
No, it's not the food. We're not encouraging pie eating in museums unless it's in the designated area like a cafe. No, seriously, the amount of times I need to tell people not to eat crisps in the galleries is amazing. Things I probably won't keep in the episode. Yes, people get very upset when they're not allowed to eat crisps in the galleries.
I just don't understand, why do you have to eat? I just don't, eat outside. Can you not go 40 minutes without food?
This just reminds me of an excellent conversation. It was either on Museum Hour or it was on one of the Facebook groups on, obviously Facebook. But it was something about what's the oddest thing that you've had to stop someone eat in an exhibition space. And I think the winner of that competition was someone eating actual whole ribs.
What?
Actual whole ribs in a gallery full of, animal skeletons. I mean, that's kind of an amazing thing. It's thematic. It's wrong. It's messy. How did you even get in there?
What was the container?
I have no idea. I didn't ask follow-up questions.
Is that what's called immersive learning or something?
So the Raspberry Pi, for those of you who don't know, is a low-cost credit card-sized computer. It's made in the UK, and it's used for a variety of kind of DIY projects. And it exists in many versions, ranging from the tiny Raspberry Zero, which weighs 9 grams, and all the way up to a more powerful one, which is a whopping 45 grams. I just want to emphasize that these are tiny, tiny computers, which is quite cool.
So I think in this episode, my voice will be the voice of everyone of our listeners that has no idea what they do or what they could possibly be used for.
Yeah, and that's fine. That's fine. I'm cool. I'm totally on board with that. I am a geek, and I live with a geek. So between us, we're quite keen on Raspberry Pis. We use a Raspberry Pi that powers our media center. So that's basically set up so that we can access loads of TV shows and all sorts of stuff, right? And music and all sorts of things that we can just kind of go in and select and be like, play that for me, TV, do it. Because we don't watch actual TV. So there you go. So we have a magical media center instead, which is powered by Raspberry Pi.
I have watched my partner set one up for music, the same thing, but for music.
Yeah.
And I tried to watch the process and tried to understand the sort of capabilities of the thing and everything. But I just don't, I think I'm so far beyond knowing where to begin with it. And I don't think that I'm terrible with computers, but I think that there are people who will listen later to a lovely interview from someone who knows about computers but thinks they don't. And I don't think they can imagine. Not knowing.
We've all got different skill levels, obviously.
We also have various Raspberry Pis around the house, including acting as a music server and as a general media center as well, and also one that does kind of ad hoc projects and stuff. But I think the thing, Chloe, about Raspberry Pi is that the whole idea of them was to allow this kind of grassroots engagement with computing. Right. Because they were kind of developed as a response to the fact that people in universities were seeing 18-year-olds start computer science courses who hadn't grown up with that kind of tinkering and so on that you used to get in the 80s and so on, when there were quite a lot of low-cost computers that you could kind of mess around with and program to do stuff. And people weren't doing that so much. And so the whole rationale behind it, one of the rationales in a way, as I understand it, was that they wanted to give people an opportunity to kind of muck around and try things out and so on, but in a kind of very safe and accessible and easy and most of all cheap way. And the great thing about it is that there's this huge kind of community that's grown up, so that if you do get stuck, there's loads of people who can help you. There's loads of forums where people will answer your questions and take you through stuff step by step. There's a magazine, a really fantastic magazine called The Magpie.
And there are loads of Raspberry Pi for Dummies books and with some really basic projects to get you started.
Okay.
And more importantly, I think there's loads and loads and loads of educational resources, because like Christina said, this was actually partly aimed at teaching young people these skills, right? So a lot of these things are actually aimed at kids. And I mean, really kids, right? Not, we're talking like...
Should be perfect for me then.
No, that's not what I meant. I just mean
It's what
that...
I mean.
No. It's just that a lot of it is... It's meant to be educational. It's meant to be quite fun. And I mean, if you find it daunting to start with like the full-on thing or buying a kit, then, you know, you can totally go and look up, frankly, school resources for this, where it's like, this is what it is, this is what you can do, here's something really simple, it makes some lights flash, it's amazing. And they make such cute things. I seriously wish I had offspring just so that I could sit and tinker with this stuff with them, because there's some really, really cute stuff. I used to go to a lot of maker events when I lived in Cambridge, because across the country there are these things called raspberry jams. Where these are maker events where people give talks or little workshops and people sell components and they kind of swap ideas and show off projects that they've done. People make so much with these little kits, and kids make them and teenagers make them and old men make them. Basically anyone can get on board, and I feel like if you just start light, I feel like there's every possibility that everyone can pick up something from this.
Okay.
It's kind of at all levels.
That does make me feel a lot better, actually, because I think the impression I always got... So my partner is good with computers and he works with them and everything. So I sort of... It's all... Whatever he does, it seems high level to me. So I was assuming that it was this sort of big, scary mountain of which I didn't even know where to begin climbing, rather than where
I would,
the
for
bottom
example,
is.
maybe not ask him, because he will assume a level of knowledge that you might not have, for example. Even though he knows you really well, obviously. He knows you well and he loves you. But he might fly into it from a, I know these things, clearly you know them kind of perspective, which is obviously something that, in a more general way, conservators suffer from all the time, when we kind of launch into an explanation and people go, I don't really understand what you mean by humidity. And it's like, I need to go back to basics. So yeah, but it's something you could totally look into if you wanted to. So no need to look frightened.
I think Raspberry Pi for kids would be a good thing.
Yeah, and I love that's out there.
I do as well. That's really, really good. Yeah.
But not just for kids. I mean, as
obviously.
Jenny said, people are doing all kinds of things with them. And I think one of the reasons they're quite attractive to museums is because you can do quite a lot of stuff without necessarily having a lot of specialist knowledge. And they're really cheap. And museums don't tend to have a lot of money.
They are really cheap.
And so they do...
to give you kind of guideline, the Raspberry Pi Zero, which is the smallest one that you can get, that's about £5.
Oh, wow.
That's a computer for £5. Granted, you will need to buy some extra things to make it do what you want. But as a starting cost, £5. And then the bigger models are... Christina, do you remember how much they are? Are they about 20 quid?
I want to say like 20 or 30 quid off the top of my head. And then you'll need to buy a few extra things, various cables and so on. You'll probably need to get hold of a keyboard and a mouse. You don't need a screen necessarily, because we just use the TV often. So if you've got an HDMI cable, you can just use your TV as a monitor for it, because it is literally just the computer. So in order to interact with it, you're going to need some kind of way of interacting. You can buy touch screens that are designed to work for them as well.
And a lot of museums do experiment with that now, which I think is really great.
So I was involved with a project at a previous museum where we had a lot of touch screens in the galleries, and the touchscreen displays, each screen was running a display as a different display, and they were all being run not over the network because we had issues with actual physical networking. So each touchscreen had its own CPU, its own computer PC tower, and these were hidden in voids above the showcases. In the sort of dead space that you get above a showcase. And of course, having a computer running for 12 hours a day, they used to get in a confined space. They used to get really, really hot. The fans were going all the time. I was kind of worried it was a fire risk, apart from anything else.
Yeah, I was going to say, I'd really worry about the heat.
And it was having a kind of, appreciable effect on the temperature in the showcase as well. Although we did install venting as well. And so we thought, well, why not use a Raspberry Pi? They run very cold, So they don't produce a lot of heat output, and they'd be really small and cheap and so on. And for something very kind of contained, like just a touchscreen display, they've easily got enough processing power to do that. So I spent quite a long time trying to set this up. Unfortunately, this doesn't have a happy ending, because the touchscreens we had, one of the issues with the Raspberry Pi is that the actual processor architecture is not the same as it is for most PCs. And so the sort of standard drivers that we had for the touchscreens, the actual to run the hardware, weren't compatible with that. And I kind of worked with the touchscreen company and so on, but we never really managed to get over those issues, which is a huge shame. But other people have managed this by kind of hacking other touchscreens and so on. And I think as Raspberry Pis start to get a bit more widely used, then there will be other things available.
And actually, I asked around a little bit on Reddit, both in r/museum pros, which is where the museum professionals go, and in /Raspberry Pi. I'm trying to remember if it's actually called Raspberry Pi or if it's called something else, but I'm terrible. But anyway, in the Raspberry Pi subreddit, for basically ideas and if anyone had seen anything cool being done by museums that utilized Raspberry Pis. And someone linked me to something called Pi Presents, which is
yeah, I looked at that.
a multimedia toolkit for creating displays and that sort of thing in museums. So not necessarily touchscreen ones, although it could I think link into that as well. So that's something that's actually developed very much for galleries and museums, where you can go and download some of their guidance, and it'll help you build what you need to maybe do a kind of a very basic display, something that changes on a screen, that sort of thing. And that's a really good idea. That's a great resource.
Yeah, I think from memory, Pi Presents is, if you're literally just got a presentation screen, so it's not interactive, it is literally just a display screen, then that's absolutely brilliant. And I think what I didn't say earlier, but Chloe might be interested in this actually, is that the whole, basically the Pis have an SD card, and everything is contained on the SD card, the operating system, all the data, anything else that you put on it, and so on. Oh, wow. And so the beauty of this is that you can set one up really, really quickly, literally by just copying the SD card and putting it in another Raspberry Pi.
Yeah, so you might need to program something once and you can then use that on several. Just copy.
But it opens up the possibility for people like sending out, and people do send out, you can buy SD cards that have everything ready on them.
Brilliant. So it's sort of infinitely repeatable in a way if you were to do, like with the displays in a number of places in the museum or in one gallery itself.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So it's...
Oh, wow.
So again, it's... Obviously that saves time for everyone, right? Mm-hmm. So if you need to do it loads of times, it's quite easy to do. And also it means that you don't have any worrying mechanical parts, like a hard drive. That's then an additional failure risk, because it's a solid state type of thing that you're storing everything on when it's an SD card.
So this sounds both... Well, there's obviously, you mentioned, Christina, the fire risk of using your more conventional computers. So it sounds both health and safety, an improvement in health and safety, and also more eco-friendly. Would they then be more energy efficient?
Yes,
undoubtedly.
They don't take very much to run at all in terms of power, which is another great selling point in that lower your energy bills considerably if you're running Raspberry Pis rather than 16 actual computer towers.
I'm not sure you're supposed to, but you can run them off a mobile phone charger, basically. Obviously, the more things you've got connected to it, then the higher the energy draw will be, and you might need an additional source of power as well. But basically, the draw is very, very low.
Oh, wow. Okay.
I kind of want to see people go beyond touchscreens and try to do even more things in museums. I'm sure people already do, and they're just not talking about it.
One of the coolest things I found was at the Museum of London, who had an exhibition last year called London in Video Games, which was literally just an exhibition about representations of London in video games over the last 35 years.
Oh, God, I bet there are loads.
No, man, I'm kind of sad I missed that. That sounds amazing.
Yeah. One of the earliest examples they had was a text-based adventure game. Remember those?
Oh, yeah.
Where you have to type in,
slightly.
yeah, exactly.
Remember those.
Okay, prices for anyone who can work out how old Christina, I and Chloe are in sequence.
Well, that's basically what I grew up with, was these things on like 5.25-inch floppy disks that used to come free with PC magazines and so on a long time ago. And they were literally, Chloe, text-based games. And so it was all done at the command line, essentially, and it would say, you have entered a room, there is a key on the floor. And so you would type in, pick up key.
Oh my God,
and then it would say, you have picked up the key.
This is pre-point and click. It's, before you could actually point at anything and click it. It was very much a more go through the door or turn around, leave forest, that sort of thing, right? Where
at the Museum of London exhibition, one of the earliest examples they found was a game from 1982, which was a text-based adventure game called Streets of London, which was made for the ZX Spectrum. And they wanted to show this game in the exhibition, but they found that the computers that they had weren't really robust enough to stand being run for an exhibition day after day and so on. And there were really long load times from the cassettes, which were used for that. And the sort of, there were issues as well with the hardware, the keyboards and the monitors and so on. So, somebody has made a, old games emulator for the Raspberry Pi called RetroPie. So the Museum of London used this, as an emulator to show what it would have been like playing this game on a real ZX Spectrum. And they actually, I think, provided proper controllers, joysticks, and so on.
Amazing.
So you could actually play these games and so on. But what was running it wasn't a real 30-year-old ZX Spectrum. It was a Raspberry Pi emulating that. But it's a really good example of something where it kind of allows you to use this stuff in an exhibition, but without sort of unacceptable wear and tear to your actual old computers and so on. And I think for things like computer museums, it's actually a really brilliant substitute for that.
Yeah, definitely.
This is amazing. So this is actually, that seems to me to be sort of heading towards restoration, like, or replication.
Yeah, well, it is making a game usable again, in a way, even when you don't have the actual original hardware.
I really want to hear from some time-based media conservators now about this and how they could use Raspberry Pis in this. I bet they already do.
Yeah, they possibly do. And if you are one and you want to tell us something, please write in. Please. We love hearing from people.
We can probably talk to you in our time-based media episode, which we'll be having in the future at some point.
Yes, subtle hint.
I should at this point put a shout out to my friend Helen, who actually works for Raspberry Pi in Cambridge and has been incredibly useful. Hi, Helen. At giving me some pointers to Raspberry Pis that have been used in museums. Macclesfield Silk Museum have actually used Raspberry Pis for a demonstration model for museum visitors to show people how punch cards work. So a long time ago, the looms that used to make patterned silk textiles used punch cards, which are arguably some of the earliest computer programs. In fact, they're literally cards with holes punched into them, which tell the loom what kind of weaving pattern to do according to where the holes are in the cards.
Jacquard looms, that's right, isn't it?
Jacquard looms, yes, exactly. So Macclesfield,
in the room.
So Macclesfield Silk Museum found that they wanted to sort of allow visitors to understand the kind of relationship between these cards and the holes in them and what pattern would actually be woven from that particular card. So they've made a really nice kind of terminal in the gallery where, which is run by a Raspberry Pi, where you can take a card and place it onto some sort of prongs in front of the terminal, and then it will pop up on the screen with the pattern that would have been woven from that particular card. And I think it's a really kind of simple but effective way of kind of showing how objects would have worked in use.
Oh, that's amazing. I love that example. That's great.
That's really cool.
Ingenious.
Thanks, Helen. Again.
Yeah, that's amazing. I remember seeing something quite clever at one of these maker days at a Raspberry Jam. Someone was playing around with Bluetooth beacons. So it's basically wireless little discs that you put next to things, and they would send a command. They would be powered, essentially, or linked to a Raspberry Pi. And then you could do some clever things with your smartphone, picking up Bluetooth signals. So when you went close to something, a display would light up, or something similar if you had something installed or running on your phone. And I thought that was definitely a winner for the museum sector, right? It wasn't used in a museum context at all, but I immediately thought, how is that not used immediately for audio guides? Because these little discs were really cheap. And I thought that's brilliant for audio guides, maybe tours around archaeological sites, because what if you just put one of these little discs on one interpretive panel, because they're easy enough to replace if they ever fall off or get damaged or something. And then if your visitors are wandering around the archaeological site on their own, which they often are, there's not tours all the time when you're at like a Roman fort or something, then each time they stop by, say, a building or something, it could, light up and, I don't know, start an audio thing if you have it activated on your phone, and it could start telling you, like, this is a Roman granary and it used to hold 7 tons of, I don't know, wheat. I don't know. But like I just thought there was so much potential there. So if anyone out there is experimenting with these cheap Bluetooth beacons for, audio tours or something else, please tell me. I'm dying to hear from you.
Audio tours or narrative exhibitions.
Yeah, I mean, I just thought, there's so much you could do with that. But I get very excited about geeky projects. I really do. So something I've started reading about that people are doing, because loads of people are now hipsters who brew their own beer. No, people have always brewed their own beer. Come on. Long before people became hipsters. They're true hipsters. They did it before it was cool.
I used to brew beer, and I am in no sense a hipster.
No. Anyway, so when someone has developed a brewer's helper, where it's something where it checks the temperature and like all these sorts of things, so that you get your brew right. And I thought, oh my God, environmental monitoring.
See, I have this written down. Yeah, it's the only thing that, having no idea really how it can be utilised. I thought, oh my God, environmental monitoring, that would be amazing. This is so possible, right? But I think the problem is someone, preferably a student, so any students listening, listen up. Environmental monitoring could totally be possible with Raspberry Pis if we figured out which of the available temperature and humidity monitors, because both exist, because people make weather stations with these things, which ones are exact enough for what we want, and how you would conveniently log the data. Basically, someone needs to run some experiments out there, and then, I don't know, be rich by selling the kits. Because if you sold all the bits together, then you would get museum people totally buying them, I think. That's a brilliant idea. Yeah.
I'm totally pimping this idea that I've had for years. Because I don't cough. I don't have time to do this.
So there was sorry, go on.
No, I just dying for someone to do this. So anyone with loads of time on their hands, or looking for a PhD topic or a dissertation topic, you should do this.
One of the things about it, about a Raspberry Pi, is that there's also, you can attach hardware, as Jenny says, and there's a huge variety of sensors available. And there are things called hats. Hardware attached on top, apparently. But they're kind of boards that you can add on top of your Raspberry Pi, and you can add all kinds of things. There are pollution sensors as well, which I think could potentially have a role in gallery monitoring.
Oh, yeah.
And as Jenny said, there's also sensors for RH and temperature, which people use quite commonly to make home weather stations. And there's light sensors as well, but there are also various controllers as well, so you can do things that happen if the light reaches a certain level, or if the temperature gets over a certain level as well. So they can be used not just for sensing, but also possibly for environmental control.
Oh, that's lovely. That would be amazing.
No.
I have to say, I have not come across any examples of this actually happening.
No.
And I don't know how robust the systems would be, and most importantly, I don't know how...
try it out.
Yeah, I don't know how well calibrated they would be or anything like that, but it would be really cool to try it out.
Yeah, agreed. Oh God, I hope there's one for ultraviolet light.
Oh, be amazing.
Oh. Like things I would do if I had all the money and time. No, generally, I think this would be an absolutely brilliant thing for people to try out, especially in the student environment. But yeah, that's all I can do. I can only pimp the idea. Next, we've got an interview with a lovely chap called Mark. Let's listen to it now. He's used a Raspberry Pi. I'm here with Mark Kearney. Mark, would you like to present yourself? What do you do?
I am a doctoral researcher in heritage science based at UCL's Institute for Sustainable Heritage.
So we're talking to you today because you're one of the few conservators I know who's been using a Raspberry Pi. Could you tell me a little bit about your Pi project? What did you do and why?
Sure. So the Raspberry Pi project there's a bit of a backstory to the Raspberry Pi project in the sense that I went for my interview at the V&A to get the Icon Heritage Lottery funded internship. And I got a little tour of the lab afterwards, and there was these 2 plastic handbags that were kind of slowly disintegrating in front of everyone's eyes. And they were like, you'll be working on these when if you get the job. Mm. So fast forward like 5 months later, and I'm in the job. And we're still looking at these handbags, but they've gone even worse. In the 4 or 5 months that, since the interview to that point, they had completely disintegrated. And we were thinking to ourselves, God, it'd be great to kind of map this somehow or record it somehow, other than us just going, oh, that's a new bit broken off. Yeah. And I had been reading at the time about the camera unit that had just been released for the Pi. And I had used Pis previously, and I thought, oh yeah, that would be great. We could use a little Raspberry Pi because, the lab space wasn't terribly big, and we didn't want to, set up an entire camera studio just for 2 plastic handbags.
Yeah, it takes up a lot of space.
It does, yeah. And we also didn't really want to kind of cart it over to photography and take up space in their lab or anything like that. So we said, yeah, let's use a Raspberry Pi. Let's try and get that done. So that's the kind of backstory of it. It was basically came out of the fact that, the people in the lab noticed that 2 of our research objects were just literally falling apart in front of our eyes. And we thought, well, can we try and view it somehow?
So you used a Raspberry Pi because of space restrictions?
Yeah, but also the Raspberry Pi would let us do something long term. So we started talking about it, and we kind of thought, well, we can take photos. I mean, photos would have been very easy to do. We could have just gone along with our cameras. But we didn't want to kind of spend much effort on it, really. We wanted to kind of set it up and let it go. And then we also wanted to do it, for the remainder of the internship. And then try and do a time-lapse photography video of it to see could we, kind of make something for kind of PR purposes, and maybe also a bit of research that showed, what can happen to a plastic object as it decays over a very short period of time. At that point in time, I had about a year left in the internship, so a year in museum time is quite short.
Yeah,
but a year in plastic time can be the difference between being able to show something on display and it being confined to a box in the storage area and never really being allowed out again. So that's where it kind of came out of, really. It was trying to use a Raspberry Pi because it was the most convenient thing that we could think of to use. And the flexibility of being able to code with it meant that we could really do whatever we wanted with it. So we decided to take a photo an hour for about 9 months, 10 months.
Oh, wow. So did you have an interest in the Raspberry Pi before this?
Yeah, I had used one before. I had kind of gotten one quite early when they came out, and basically wanted to create the telly that we had at home into a smart telly, so that I could, instead of watching videos on my laptop, I could watch them on my telly. So the program Kodi had come out for the Raspberry Pi.
Oh yeah, that's totally what we're doing at home as well.
Yes, exactly. Brilliant little program.
Oh yeah.
And also, I had a little bit of coding experience. I mean, I really had very little, but I kind of thought, oh, that'll be a nice Christmas project to do over a little while. So I just kind of dived right into it and started coding on the Pi to get the Kodi working. And it was great. And then I moved to London and I didn't have a telly anymore. So I kind of had a spare Pi. So that was also the other thing that happened with getting the Pi into the V&A, was that I had one sitting in my bedroom and it wasn't doing anything. So I said it would be good from that point of view. But yeah, so I had a little bit of experience with them, but really very minor, from coding point of view, very, very minor coding experience.
Oh, well, that's good. So that gives me hope that, people can pick up these skills without it being an insurmountable task. Because a lot of the time people are quite, a little bit put off because they're like, I'm not a programmer though, I've not done that.
And neither was I at the time, but I think, GitHub and Stacks Exchange are fantastic places to find the basis of your code. And I found my code just by Googling Raspberry Pi time lapses, I think, and eventually finding somebody who had something reasonably similar to what I wanted to do, but had kind of the main lines and the main commands that I needed. So I was able to kind of take them, learn how they were working, and then code them in a way that I wanted it to work for our project. So really, the only thing that you need to know is how to use Google search. That's about the most coding that you kind of need to learn how to use.
That's good. That's good. I like that. So aside from that, was it difficult to set up? I mean, so the coding side is kind of a beast of its own, but then hardware-wise, was it difficult to set up?
Yes and no. So there were two parts to the Raspberry Pi project. So there's the Raspberry Pi and the camera, and then the camera setup, shall we say. Mm-hmm. So setting up the camera was really straightforward. There was really good guidelines on the Raspberry Pi website for it, and we got that working really quickly after getting it. What was a little bit more difficult was getting lighting correct, because we had fluorescent tube lights in the lab, which are great for lighting a big open space. Mm-hmm. But when you're trying to do a shiny surface, the reflections were quite annoying. And we were actually losing a lot of detail about the object through these reflections. So we basically kind of created a plastizote tent. One of the better parts of working in a conservation studio is there are lots of offcuts of everything. Yes. So plastizote was easy to come by. The girls in textile conservation, I think, gave me that. And then there was some mounting card, which we used as a kind of a reflector to bounce kind of bright light back up into the object. Got that off paper cons. So everyone kind of helped out a little bit. So once we had the Pi setup done and the lighting the way that we wanted, setting up the actual Raspberry Pi was really, really quite easy. The only thing that we changed, which took us a little bit of time to figure out how to do, was the field of view on the camera is quite wide open. So it's very good if you want to do a landscape photograph, time lapse on your Pi. But if you're trying to get something that's kind of 12 inches, 30 centimeters across, it's actually not particularly well suited to that. So what we did was get reading glasses. We bought a cheap pair of reading glasses for like $2.99 and put one of the lenses. So I think it was a 3x lens that we put in front of the camera lens, and that just magnified everything, and that worked a treat. Wow. Yeah, I mean the quality of the Raspberry Pi lens probably isn't professional grade quality, but it's good enough, and you can see quite a lot of detail on the high res images. And adding a 3x magnification lens to it didn't really change the characteristics of the photos very much. There was a little bit of barrel distortion on the edges, but we weren't interested in the edges. But again, that was probably taking the whole thing a little bit too technically. So really, it didn't really matter to us at all.
Oh, that's really interesting. Oh, I love that you properly MacGyvered it. That's great.
Yeah, and you know what? It became this kind of thing that people would come into the lab and they'd see this kind of white plastizote box with this kind of weird camera thingy sticking up out of it, and they'd immediately go, "What are you doing over there?" And it was a great conversation starter. So when we were giving tours of the lab, they all got to see the Raspberry Pi project, and it was a nice intro into, this is what conservation does, this is what conservation science does, and this is what we're doing with regards to our modern materials.
Oh, that's really lovely. Was it expensive?
No,
I mean, I suppose you already had the Pi, so that's a small cost already.
That was the main expense was the Pi.
Yeah.
The camera itself was £25.
Okay.
And then we also got a little Wi-Fi dongle for it again for, I think it was about £7 or £8. I know. So one of the ways the Raspberry Pi project came about as well was that Icon had given me some funding for books and supplies along with the internship, and we had used a little bit of it on a sample kit, and then we had less than £40 left, and we didn't really know what to do with it. And £40 wasn't enough to buy a book or anything like that. So we thought, actually, we can use that money. So I know it was under about £40 to get those two things.
That's good to know. Like, that seems like that's not an insurmountable amount of money. Like, it's something you can probably manage to muster, even if you're a smaller institution.
Absolutely, and that was a key thing to us in actually our funding application for using the remainder of the Icon budget on the camera and the dongle, was that, this is something that if we set it up, we might be able to kind of give out to other people, because it really, I mean, if you can get Raspberry Pi kits for about 45, maybe £50 that has the charger and the SD card. So if you tack on another £25 for the camera, you're looking at about £75-80, which really isn't terribly too much.
Yeah.
And you can do a lot of things with it then.
Yeah, especially, I mean, whilst it might be bought for one project, it can easily spawn more. So it's not like it's it's not a one-off thing. You can use it again and again and again for all sorts of things.
Exactly. Yeah. And you can, and the beauty of it is that it's so small and so portable that you can really move it wherever you want. So once it's done in one project and you want to do another thing with it, you can very easily pack it all up, plug it in somewhere else, and it's ready to go.
Yeah, exactly. So what did you learn from this project?
Actually, I probably learned a couple of things. I suppose the first thing is that I learned how to code a little bit more.
Yeah.
So there was definitely some troubleshooting. One of the things that we had an issue with was the way that the Wi-Fi network is set up in the V&A. So we used the public Wi-Fi, and we didn't use the staff Wi-Fi. But the way that the public Wi-Fi works was that you would get a different IP every about 20 hours or something like that.
Oh, yeah.
So when we were trying to tunnel into the Pi, because we were using an iPad to do everything, we didn't have a screen or a mouse or keypad. We used an iPad. We had to ask the IT department to give it a static IP, which they did very kindly, but it did take a little bit of time to figure out, oh yeah, we need a static IP, that's why this isn't working. And I suppose troubleshooting as well, because of those issues with the lighting and with the IP address. And the confidence that I gained from doing the Raspberry Pi project allowed me to, A, recognize that coding could help me in this area, and B, kind of give me the confidence to say, I might know exactly how to do it, but I know where I can find it, and I know that the coding isn't scary enough that it's going to put me off. I know I can do it. It'll take a little bit of time.
Yeah. Oh, that's really great. Are you planning on using a Raspberry Pi for any future projects?
I am, yeah. So back to the PhD, I will hopefully be trying to do some sensing on some plastic objects in the future. And I'm hoping that I might be able to integrate the sensors into a Raspberry Pi, so that we cut down on the size, because currently the sensors themselves are pretty small, but the stuff that they connect to is quite large. And I know that somebody has designed a particular piece of electronics that works with the Raspberry Pi that does the same thing.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, definitely in the future I'd like to do something with the Raspberry Pi.
I love that. I look forward to reading and hearing all about that. Anyway, thank you so much for talking to us. We really appreciate
You're very welcome. Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
I think, as I said earlier, Mark is a very clever man, and he forgets. I think he's in too deep, possibly, with his tech knowledge. I think he forgets how possible or how inept, how little knowledge people can have. So when he describes himself as having very little experience, I've done a bit of coding. Like, I think for me, at least, I think I would need a great degree more experience to even think of a project involving a Raspberry Pi than I have already. So I think it's an excellent opportunity. It was an excellent opportunity for training and for, training days, maybe a workshp.
Oh yeah,
I'd love to do a workshop. That would be amazing.
I'd love to see,
because then you can start thinking in terms of Raspberry Pis, and in terms of the types of equipment that you could utilize.
So, Chloe, you mentioned training. I will say, I live in the east of England, where there's a consortium called Share Museums East, and I think there must be Share consortia elsewhere as well. But they organise training for museums across the region in a variety of things, not just conservation and collection care, but all kinds of museum practice. And they did actually, a couple of years ago, organise a workshop in Raspberry Pis for museums, which unfortunately I was not able to go to. But I think people are starting to pick up on this as a thing. And so do look out for opportunities like this, and if you've got training consortia in your area, then let them know that this is something you'd be interested in, and they can find a trainer and set up a course.
That's brilliant. I'm writing that down.
And if you want to read more about Mark's project, I think we should say it's actually on the V&A website, on the V&A conservation blog.
So we'll pop a link to that in the show notes. Yeah.
And to other people, do it. Set up time-lapse cameras for other crumbling, failing, deteriorating objects in your collections, because it would be so cool to see these processes in action.
Yeah,
it doesn't have to. Well, I mean, yes, the process of deterioration is obviously something incredibly fascinating, because it can probably teach us the kinds of things that happen, and the signs as well. If we're not familiar with the deterioration of certain materials, the signs to look out for. But it can be used for all sorts of things as well, like I've seen time lapses of decant projects and install projects, and object travel as well, if the vibrations of whatever situation is causing travel of an object on display or in a store.
Just watching someone clean something is quite pleasing.
Yeah, exactly.
We have an example of actually you cleaning something.
Oh yes, yeah, making something look nicer. That wasn't a Pi though, that was just my phone.
Yeah, no, that's true.
It's the sort of level
I think the great thing about Mark's project though is that it was over several months, so it kind of shows stuff that really is not kind of perceptible otherwise. I mean, obviously, don't just not treat your objects just so you can photograph them.
No, obviously, no, quite.
But if you've got something, and you even want to see if it even is changing, I think it's a really fantastic project.
And I'm thinking things like, I'd love to see audio tests really sped up, where it's like, oh, look at that. Oh, it's corroding massively now. I don't know. I'd be quite fascinated by that sort of thing. But then I am a huge nerd, so I would be fascinated. Anyway, yeah, there's loads of potential. We would love to hear from you. We'd love to hear your ideas. We'd love to hear what you're actually doing, things you've seen done. Tell us everything. We'd love to hear from you.
And in addition to our interview with Mark, we also recently talked to two other people with a lot of experience of using Raspberry Pis. Alex Bate from the Raspberry Pi Foundation and George Oates from the Museum in a Box project.
My name's Alex. I am the social media editor for Raspberry Pi Foundation. So I am in charge of the social media accounts such as Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. I also write the blog and write for Magpie magazine, as well as, it would seem, appearing in podcasts.
Hi, I'm George Oates. I'm the founder and CEO of Museum in a Box. I'm a designer by trade, worked in software for 20 years. And enjoying working on Museum in a Box, trying to help museums get their collections out into the world.
So, George, do you want to tell us a bit about Museum in a Box?
Sure. So Museum in a Box is sort of a new play on the old idea of a museum handling collection where, for quite a few years, museums have been sending boxes of original objects out into classrooms. And, the classrooms would rent a box for a couple of weeks and, the kids would be able to touch the objects and use them to think with. We're trying to bring that idea into the 21st century by using a couple of bits of tech, mostly 3D printing, so you can make more copies of museum objects to distribute them more widely. And also we're using this idea of the Internet of Things. So what happens if you connect these museum objects to the Internet? What kinds of information can you tell about those things? And we've made a little box with what we call a brain in it. And the brain's actually a Raspberry Pi computer with a couple of other bits and bobs, including speaker and amp and an NFC reader. And each of the objects in the box has a little sticker on it, an NFC sticker. So when you put the object on the box, it talks to you and can tell you a story about itself or play you a piece of music or anything really. And it's really fun. And you get to touch stuff. And you're not just looking at a screen, but you're actually sort of holding and feeling the objects. And it's a really sort of nice multi-sensory way to experience a set of things.
So what was the sort of original kind of inspiration for this? Was it trying to get objects out there and more accessible, or had it come from museums, or was it something you came up with as an idea?
Yeah, well, I've been orbiting the cultural heritage sector now for, 7 or 8 years. And my background in design is sort of online mostly, web-based stuff. And the experience I've got is around big cultural content systems like the Flickr photo sharing website, the Internet Archive, etc. And my experience there in a sort of software or digital context was about trying to increase access to digital materials in that space. And the way to do that is to have many descriptions of things, not just one. Because, if you only have one description of a thing, however official it is, it can be a bit difficult to retrieve if you don't know the language that the object was described with. But, as I sort of moved from the digital world into the physical world, I was lucky enough to do a short residency at Somerset House about 2 years ago now. And my friends Tom Flynn and Harriet Maxwell joined me for 2 weeks there. And we basically made a kind of made-up collection, which was a set of 3D prints from the British Museum collection. And we selected them basically because they were available and they had a nice geographic spread. So there was no sort of curatorial point of view at all. It was just basically we could have them. So what we would do is each day we would take a single object from the set of 10 and use it as our object of focus. And we'd make a little exhibit about that object each day. And it was a public space, so, normal humans could come in and ask us what we were doing. And, we were talking to them about the idea, and everybody really enjoyed the point of view we ended up taking about these objects, which was sort of about how they made their way to the British Museum. So, for example, random fact, we learnt the Rosetta Stone and Hoa Hakananaya were acquired by the British Museum on the same day. Can you imagine how exciting that would have been for the museum? But anyway, one of the days that we were there, I knew I wanted to do an experiment with this idea of Internet of Things. What happens if you connect these objects directly to a computer? And so we made the very first kind of demonstration there where we stuck the stickers on the objects, and basically the interaction was if you boop them, which we like to say boop is as the action when you put an object on the box. So when you boop the objects, it would just sort of read you the wall label, as it were, and we just sort of used a really computery voice. And but that very first demonstration isn't actually that different to the interaction that you have today in Museum in a Box, and almost 2 years later. So it was there that we sort of had the idea that, what happens if you have these things connected to the internet, and how many different descriptions can you have of an object, and what happens if you have, thousands of copies of an object out in the world, and, so all these interesting questions started opening up. But then we ended the residency, but we'd had such a warm reaction from the public that Tom and I in particular wanted to keep going with the idea, so we sort of picked it up again towards the end of 2015. And we started a company together and basically just started building prototypes and showing them to people and haven't really looked back.
Why did you decide to use a Raspberry Pi as the brain for your box?
It was mostly because we knew it was a powerful computer and it was, mass produced and so, stable. And it allowed us to experiment quickly without needing to worry too much about the capacity of the computer. And also the angle that it's already being used as an education tool in schools was definitely a factor. Like, one of the angles of Museum in a Box is around, there's potential there for sort of cross-curricular learning, and maybe it will get to the point where kids can actually engineer some of the interactions around the box. So by acknowledging that Raspberry Pi was already used really widely in schools as a sort of part of the arsenal to teach kids computer science and stuff, we just thought that was a good match. So robustness and, pretty far reach.
And I guess cheapness as well.
Yeah. I mean, there are quite a few cheaper microcomputers, and actually we've sort of experimented with a few, but we still like the Raspberry Pi because it's just, it works and it's good. But yeah, you're right. Overall, it's relatively cheap.
Alex, your involvement with this as well?
I randomly came across Museum in a Box when I was lost somewhere in the depths of the internet. And it was a video which you'll be able to find online. It's the Planets box, which is definitely, I believe, one of my favourites. Watching this video that they'd loaded onto their website, we were somewhat blown away. So I think in the space of about 2 minutes of discovering the video, I was already emailing the team, asking them if I could come and see them. And about 2 weeks later, I was in the office, and I will admit that the first time I put something on that box, I got a bit teary. I think I hid it well. But it's absolutely fascinating. Yes, you could say that Museum in a Box is aimed as a classroom aid, but I'm a bit too old for a classroom now. And it blew me away. And I've been in love with it ever since. I've been pushing it in the Magpie magazine. And, if anybody kind of asks for examples of things that you can do with their Raspberry Pi, Museum in a Box is definitely one of the ones that I push because it's such a, I don't want to say simple idea because it's so complex and wonderful, but the idea of having it read a tag is actually quite simple, and something that I'd been talking to a colleague about only weeks previous, but we were going to use it just for a bit of fun.
Yeah.
We were going to have action figures play their theme songs.
Oh, wow.
And then George comes along and completely blows that out of the water with something that's, educational and wonderful. And there's so much scope for it.
So do you get a lot of people coming to Raspberry Pi with things they've done? What can Raspberry Pi offer to...
Well, we're a not-for-profit charity, which I definitely think is something that not everyone's aware of, but we're an educational charity. So although we do get a lot of emails saying, please, can you send my classroom 50 Raspberry Pis, it's something that we're not really able to do. But what we are able to do is through our wide community is offer support. And I think that's something that when George mentioned other options instead of the Raspberry Pi that exist out there, they're wonderful. People use them in many projects, but what makes us slightly different is our amazing community of makers, educators, ranging in all ages and abilities across the world. So when we have people come to us and maybe they've got an idea for a project, or maybe they're making something and they need funding, we do have that ability to put it on Twitter, maybe write a blog post, point them in the direction of someone that has done something similar, and that's where you see these ideas grow.
So if any of our listeners are inspired to
drop me an email,
come up with a cool museum project, drop you an email. Right, we'll put that in the show notes as well. Fine. George, have you had any kind of contact with other people who are doing museum-based projects using Raspberry Pis?
Yes, yeah. The sorts of projects that are starting to happen are kind of pretty straightforward museum interactives, where it might a Raspberry Pi might be sort of installed in a corner to drive a screen that just shows you a slideshow, that kind of stuff. And, that's relatively easy to hook up as a enthusiastic computer lover. So, it's not too much of a jump for somebody who knows a little bit about computing to configure one of those. There's probably a ton of experimentation going on, but it's just a matter of finding it out,
So how much were museums involved in the kind of making of your boxes, the selecting and so on?
That varies, actually, because we made a demonstration box last year called Big Stuff from the British Museum, and we were able to make that box because we did 3D scans of objects that were large and in public areas of the museum. So we didn't actually need to ask any permission to do that. But since then, we have worked directly with some museums and, in fact, done 3D digitization for them in order to make the box. And that kind of work's increasing, actually, which is really exciting. But yeah, you're right. Ideally, we would want to partner with museums as often as we can, so the contents of the box supports their own education and outreach kind of plans and schedules.
Yeah.
But yeah, we can certainly work really closely with the museum, or there's also a lot of open 3D models on the internet now, and the planets box that Alex mentioned before, that was just, we bought some wooden balls on the internet and we're able to make a really fun box just using something pretty abstract. You also don't need to use 3D prints either. You can just use postcards that have an image of objects on them, and the interaction in that case is just the same. So the 3D printing isn't core, but it certainly makes a difference if you can. We think it certainly makes a difference if you can actually handle and just experience the 3D-ness of it.
Do you think that the experience people are getting of interacting with replica objects is that different from actually being in contact with the real thing?
Well, let me start by saying I think it depends a fair bit on what the object is. There's really nothing like being able to visit the British Museum and seeing Hoa Hakananaya. I definitely respect the desirability of seeing the original object. But in our research with kids, they don't care. They don't, necessarily recognize the power or the aura of the original object, yet. Maybe they will. So, in that case, I think one of the hopes that we have for Museum in a Box is that it might encourage a visit to see the actual thing. Or in the context of, you send out a box that is sort of helping with a pre-visit briefing, if you like, for the kids. So they get to see replicas, and then maybe when they go to the museum, they can find the original. But we've also heard a lot in our research that museums don't get visited as much as museums think they do. And a lot of schools aren't in the position, either by locality or finances, to visit the physical place. And if you're talking about a museum like I don't like using the British Museum as an example because it is so exceptional, but generally speaking, most museums only have, 5% of their collection on display, or maybe 10. So there's all these other things that just can't be experienced even if you were in the place. So, maybe Museum in a Box, if we can increase that percentage of access to 20 or 50 or even 100% of the collection, that's a good thing too. But yeah, I don't know. You get to hold something amazing. That's just great, as long as you know that the thing is amazing.
Yeah, and so it's not necessarily replacing the experience of actually going to a museum and interacting with these things in person.
No, yeah. I think it's very deliberately a simulacrum. It's not trying to be a perfect replica. But I think actually as 3D printing gets more sophisticated, which it is every day, the quality of the replica will get better and better. Like even just the printing materials makes a difference. So you can either print in this stuff that's called SLA, which is just sort of plasticky resin, or you can print in sort of a stone-like material or as a gypsum-based material. And just the sort of heft of two 3D prints in those two different materials is really interesting. Like one of the favourite prints I've got here in the office is the Venus of Willendorf. And she's printed in that kind of gypsum material and at actual size or near close to it. And she's just beautiful to hold, But if you look at her in the museum where she lives, she's sort of in a glass case with a pole stuck up her bum, and nobody touches her, Yeah. So it's just, you know what I mean.
Yeah, and I think the cool thing about these objects is that you can boop them on the brain, and if you tried that in a real museum, then the conservators would come and jump on you pretty quickly.
Yeah. And I totally get the preservation angle here. Some things you just can't touch, otherwise they will be destroyed. Or you certainly can't let 20 grubby fingers on them, just after they've been eating peanut butter sandwiches, obviously. But again, I just love the idea that you have 1,000 copies of something out in the world, and it's not intending to take away from that original, but it's just intending to show it to more people, you know?
Yeah, I think that's one of the things I like most about it is the postcards are great, but you were talking about how this is different from just a sort of looking at stuff on the internet, for example, or looking at a display screen that's in a museum, that you've got the actual experience of handling these things. And I'm kind of interested in this for a couple of reasons. One is that one of my children is visually impaired, and so museums are, much as it pains me to say this as a museum professional, but museums are kind of hostile places in many ways for him, because he's not going to get a lot out of looking at stuff that's behind glass. But then if you can give someone a model of the things that they're learning about and so on, then they'll learn so much more through that kind of tactile learning.
We had, when we were in Somerset House even those couple of years ago, we had some folks from an organisation called Vocalise come and visit.
Oh, yeah.
You know these guys? They write amazing audio descriptions for experiences in cultural spaces. So not just describing objects, but, you know, what it's like to walk into the theatre, or, you know, the actual experience of being in the place as well. But anyway, a few of those folks came to have a look at what we were up to, and it was really interesting just observing, actually in one case, a completely blind person just operating with these objects. Mm-hmm. You know, it's stunning how quickly they can find facial features, for example, even in quite a small 3D model. But it was really interesting to get their feedback on the sort of materiality of the 3D prints, and the questions that remained, even as they could touch the things, were, well, how big is it really, and what's it made of? You know, so the 3D printing sort of encodes the information about the form of the thing, but not the size or the, you know, what it actually feels like. Yeah. And that led to a little design idea actually about, in any box we could also include an object that's designed to help scale the rest of the things in the box. Oh, wow. And also maybe we could include a little sample of the actual material that something was made of, you know, like a little cube of granite or a piece of marble. So yeah, we're definitely interested in the accessibility angle of this, and even just the fact that it plays you audio instead of having to read something. We did one of our recent projects was about doing some outreach for the Camden Council here in London, and bizarrely they have a pretty good art collection about Camden, or artists who've lived in Camden. So we made a box that had some tactile postcards and also some 3D prints of some works in their collection. And part of our work was to do some outreach ourselves in libraries and hospitals here in London. And we were absolutely thrilled when a little girl in Great Ormond Street Hospital who's non-verbal, she just lit up when she could make these objects make sound, you know, and she just, like the agency that it gave her was just sort of stunning, you know, and she just had the biggest smile on her face and she was absolutely loving it, you know. So that just, we would never have anticipated that, you know, and just to see it was really great.
I'm also interested in this because I'm a museum conservator, and perhaps unfairly, conservators are often seen as the people who say no to everything and to all the kind of cool education things that go on, and we're the kind of people who want to keep all objects locked up in a dark room where nobody can touch them and damage them and so on. Yep. So it's kind of, it sounds like it might be quite a good way of getting access to objects without any of the kind of physical damage that happens. And I just wondered, George, if you'd had any involvement with the conservators in the institutions or whether that's something you might like to do.
Yeah, let me just chat about the first point you made. But yeah, no, in terms of conservation, we would. There's a group in Oxford who are doing some really interesting 3D printing work. They're called Think See 3D, and they're doing the kind of work that takes very old objects that might be a little broken, and sort of operating in a 3D software environment and sort of, you know, filling in the cracks, as it were, then reprinting these objects as if they weren't broken, which is just a very interesting angle, I think. And also, you know, when you go into a museum and there's an object off display being, you know, protected by the conservators.
Yes.
Often they have kind of a crappy A4 piece of paper that says, "Oh, sorry, this is, being looked after now."
Yeah.
Well, but what if you could have a 3D print there instead, and clearly labelled as such? This is a replica made of plastic of the thing, but it's here just so you can see it. That's a very simple use case. I think that would be really good. But yeah, so there's a couple of angles there. There's sort of reconstruction of broken things and just a presentation of a thing that's, off the floor, as it were. And even sort of reconstruction of objects whose pieces have been separated is another use case we've experienced, where, a head of a statue is in somewhere and the body of the statue is somewhere else. You can put those bits together and then print the how it would have looked. So I think there's tons of scope in there for showing how things might have looked before. And there's also, we're starting to work with a couple of artists, the little studio called Pango Studios, who they're using kind of conventional artistic techniques on 3D prints to make them look like they're real. Like, for example, we did a project with the Jewish Museum, which was about remembrance, and one of the objects in the box was a sort of scaled down 3D print of a memorial sculpture. And Sarah from Pango, she painted it to look like I think it was granite, I'm not certain, but, I think it was. And there was sort of gold lettering and, and the result was so much nicer than just a sort of white plastic print. It also encoded sort of information because it had that artistic treatment, So, yeah, I think there's tons of stuff you could do in terms of certainly presenting fragile stuff. And I guess that's one of the sort of underlying themes of this idea is, lots of museums all over the place and libraries and archives are digitizing as much as they can all the time. But then those digitized materials often just end up sitting on some hard drive somewhere or are displayed really annoyingly in a tiny thumbnail on a website somewhere, So hopefully Museum in a Box is actually a vehicle to make use of these digitized materials and just expose them to people in a much more direct way.
So are you interested in people who have got these kind of digitized materials? Would you welcome approaches from them?
Yes, please.
Right.
Absolutely. Yeah, I was chatting to a friend the other day who was at university. I think he's studying history, and he got given a bunch of source documents around the subject of a slave ship. So all his classmates got given the same materials, and the assignment was to construct a narrative about what it was like to actually be on the slave ship from all these kind of letters and receipts, and I don't know if they're objects or not, but and he was telling me that each of the students made up a totally different vision of what the slave ship was like. And I really like that as imagine if you got a museum in a box that didn't have content, it wasn't trying to tell you something, but it was an interesting enough sort of combination of things that it just prompted questions really easily. We'd love to make a box like that too, where it's not trying to be declarative or authoritative, but it's much more about, well, what do you think the connections are between all these things?
And that's the good thing about the Raspberry Pi as well, is that you've got that ability to tag it, to place the tag on more than once. Mm-hmm. So you could have, the first time it goes on there, it could maybe ask a question that could start conversation with the students, and then you could press it on again and it will answer the question. And then you've got the idea of kind of discussion and seeing how close they were. One other project that I would bring up, just talking about the conservation, was there's one that George showed me when I was there using the Augment app with the museum fire.
Why don't you tell?
Well, I can show it. I've got the app on my phone, so I'm going to get it working. But you could probably explain it a lot better than I could.
Yeah, it was Tom did a bit of 3D digitization for. Let me see. I think it was the Southwark Museum here in London. Now, this is a museum who doesn't actually have a public premises at the moment, so all their stuff's sort of held in storage in this kind of weird little warehouse in Southwark. But he helped do some digitization for them. One of the things that he did was, I don't know, it's maybe about the size of a basketball, just a little bit bigger, and it was a little sculpture of a giraffe that was kind of sitting down kind of gently, but it was broken. So we use this app that Alex mentioned called Augment, which is just an augmented reality thingy. And what you do with Augment is you sort of look through an iPad or a phone to a reference image, and then upon that reference image, you can project a 3D model or other, animations even. So what this would do, you'd have a postcard that was the broken giraffe, and then you look at it through Augment and the giraffe is miraculously restored. So you could see very easily and quickly how it would have looked if it weren't broken. Yeah. We loved actually that you could do that in Magpie, Alex.
We've got the printed Magpie in front of me.
But it's a kind of crappy folded up photocopy or printout of...
Oh, here we go. There we go.
Oh, wow. Oh my God, sorry, I'm going to have to take a picture of this because this is absolutely amazing.
Yeah, go for it.
So you can look all around it and rotate it and so on. Augmented reality giraffe sitting on top of a printout from the magazine.
Yep.
Cool, I have just videoed that because that is super exciting. And we will try and find a way to get that online for people to see. Alex, when Jenny and Chloe and I were talking about kind of potential for using Raspberry Pis in museums generally, but more specifically conservation things, I think there was a feeling that people find this quite daunting, this idea that you need to be some kind of computer expert to even start with this. Would you say that's true?
No.
I thought not.
I definitely am not. And I somehow put together small projects at my desk. Again, it is partly that idea of community. I do have people in the office where if I'm trying to make something work, I just kind of whine at them until they come and help me.
To be fair, you work in the Raspberry Pi office. So.
I'm literally in between, like, the guys who write the educational resources and the engineers. That's where I sit.
But for those of us who aren't.
For those of you that don't, there's so many resources out there to help you learn. And it's really interesting how... It's hard to find the word really, but we run one of the many things that we run is something called Pi Academy. And Pi Academy is a 2-day event where we educate educators in how to bring digital making and Raspberry Pi, though not necessarily Raspberry Pi, they can use other things, into the classroom. So obviously we've got the recent changes in the curriculum in the UK and a whole new curriculum over in the US, and we've just started Pi Academy over there as well. When you see a grown man cry because he's made an LED blink, it changes everything, and there is probably documented proof out there of this, I'm sure. So once you get the basics, it's the same with many things. Once you've learnt how to make a button work, which is a few lines of code, and you've learnt how to make an LED light up, and you've learnt again a few lines of code, and suddenly, you go, I know how to make the light, I know how to make the button work, so how about if I use the button to turn the light on and off? And it's just that idea of ingredients. You're slowly learning all of these different ingredients to make something wonderful. It's not as hard as you would think. And as George said, there's lots of museums and events out there that are using Raspberry Pis just to play back video, which is relatively easy. And then even through that, you'll go, okay, well, I know how to make it play video, but wouldn't it be nice if it only plays the video if you press a button? Well, I've learned how to make a button. So again, it's just that idea. It's very simple. Something like the Magpie magazine that we were just talking about, and our essentials guide that Magpie produces are all free downloads. So the day that the Magpie magazine is made available in stores, it's also free for you to download. And it's that idea of everything that we produce is free. Obviously, we'd love you to go and buy the Magpie because that money goes back into paying the Magpie staff and they like being paid. But the idea that everything is free instantly opens up all the possibilities. For instance, I had someone over the other week, a YouTuber called Stephanie, and we were looking at one of our resources, which is how to make a whoopee cushion. With 2 paper plates working as a button, and when you press them together, tinfoil touches and that connection makes a fart noise happen.
Oh, wow.
So
I love that.
Now that is essentially taking that idea, what we just said, of making a button and making something play. So then we looked at that resource and we went, well, let's turn it on its head. And instead we made something that it was a coaster with a mug on it. And when you lift the mug, it made a noise. So it was reversing that process. And it was simply a case of changing one line of code.
Yeah.
So it's so easy to get into it. We have everyone from every age coming to us Maybe they used to code in their youth and now they're coming back to it. Maybe they're a slightly older generation and they're bringing their kids and grandkids into it.
Yeah.
There's so much there. And something like Pi Academy, if you go to FutureLearn, you can do online free training as well, which is the same, making LEDs blink and everything else is all free for you to do online. And everything's on the website.
Fantastic.
I guess the main point I'd like to reiterate is that we're looking for museum partners to work with really closely, because we're still trying to prove the concept, and that means making sure we have a really sound educational strategy as well as a cool thing to play with. So the more exposure we can have with museum professionals who are teaching people stuff, the better. And, it's just good for us to make as many boxes as we can at the moment. So, yeah, if there are people listening to this who have a set of digitized materials that are just sitting on a hard drive, give us a call.
Well, Alex Bate and George Oates, thank you very much for talking to the C Word today.
No problem at all.
You're welcome.
And if you've got any comments, questions or corrections, please write in and tell us. You can tweet us, email us, whatever you'd like. We love hearing from you. Thanks for listening. We're the C Word, and you've been listening to Christina Rosaic, Chloe Rumsey, and me, Jenny Mathiasen. Check out our website at thecword.show, tweet us at thecwordpodcast, or simply email us on thecwordpodcast@gmail.com. Intro and outro music is Spring by Didi Missick, used under a Creative Commons Attribution License. This has been a Wooden Dice production.